possible. Whatever remains, however improbable, must be true.
And it is not a question of a little occultism or a touch of mysticism, Mr. Denton. It is vampirism, and there's a host of damned souls at Pelham House.
I am thy father's spirit, doomed for a certain term to walk the night. Here, the old gods aren't dead. And what of the true god? He's dead. Can't complain.
People assume that time is a strict progression of cause to effect, but actually, from a non-linear, non-subjective viewpoint, it's more like a big ball of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff.
You're listening to Paranormal UK Radio.
Hi everybody, this is Irene Allen Block, the host of the Paranormal UK Radio Show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And with me today, I've got a guest host because Mark is still very, very busy. So I've got my guest host with me today, Steve Ward.
It's great to be back again, Irene. Thanks for having me again.
And you've got a show with us, haven't you, Steve? Do you want to repeat that? I know
Yes.
you mentioned it last week, but you can say it again this week.
My show is the High Strangeness Factor. And I'm right about my 2-year anniversary now.
Yeah.
So it was very nice. You were the one that invited me to the network, and I was a little apprehensive at first, but I had been a co-host on, what's the word he says? I'm a contributor to Mac Maloney's Military X-Files, which is also heard on that network. And he said, go for it. So I did.
Both radio shows are with us, Paranormal UK Radio Network.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So now we got that sorted out, and we got your show out there again. How about a guest? Do you want to introduce our guest, Steve, or shall I?
Our guest is Dr. Ian D. Rubenstein, and he has written a book called Consulting Spirit, a doctor's experience with practical mediumship.
Hello. Nice to be here.
So you are a proper medical doctor?
Yeah, proper doctor. Yes, yeah, proper doctor. We don't call ourselves. One thing I need to clear up. When my book published, they wanted to call me Ian Rubenstein, MD. But in the UK, we don't have MDs. So the way we're trained,
we have GPs.
No. Well, an MD is a postgraduate qualification. So in this country, in the UK, if you get an MD, it's like a PhD. It's like an extra. So we graduate with an undergrad. So we get a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. So that's how the UK doctors train. So they want to call me Ian Rubenstein, MD, and I said, no, you can't put MD. I haven't got an MD. But I am a doctor. And it took my publisher got really confused over that. I finally got him straightened out. The problem about my book is it's an American book. It's written in American English by a British doctor about British patients. So it's pretty weird. And it's about a weird subject. But so yeah. So I think it lands somewhere mid-Atlantic, probably around about the Azores or something like that. But yeah.
Well, oftentimes it's funny because Andy Mercer, who's often my co-host and my producer on my show, we laugh a lot about the different terms and expressions and how, of course, so many of them are the same between the U.S. and the U.K. But every once in a while you run into one that's a little bit off and does need a little bit of defining.
Yeah, well, I mean, the classic one being, for instance, in the UK, we walk on the pavement, which is something we don't do in the States. Yeah,
they go on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Well, but you call a pavement is the paved road. You know, the bit in the middle that the cars go on. So, yeah.
Well, if you say something like about a pram to somebody over here, they're going to wonder what the hell you're talking about.
Yeah.
So what's a pram over there then, Steve?
A buggy.
A buggy.
A baby buggy.
Well, we have buggies over here, but a pram is like a big thing that's high up. A perambulator, I think they used to be called.
But what we used to call baby buggies, what we call baby buggies now, used to be pushchairs.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
Oh, and
well,
then you've got the mix up about all the parts of a car. We call it the boot. You call it the trunk. We call it the bonnet. You call it the hood.
Yeah, I mean, we had it. Yeah.
And I won't tell you what you call a fanny.
Well, let me give you one small anecdote.
Yeah.
I guess this was told to me because I may not have even been born back then, but years ago, my one of my cousins, who I actually visited in 1973 when I visited over there, Margaret, she came to visit over near the Detroit area where I grew up, and she told my grandfather that he was going to bed. She said, "Well, don't worry, I will knock you up in the morning." Well, that has a different meaning over here. They had a good laugh over that.
Yeah. Well, it does mean the same. Well, there is various meanings for that over here. You know, you can get knocked up. I got knocked up twice in my life, and I got 2 sons from it. And that's the way it goes, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah. Well, yes. Well, unless you. Yeah. Never mind. We won't go there.
Yeah. We're talking to a doctor here, you know.
So do you guys put parental guidance ratings on your shows? We may have to do it on this one.
I think you need to, guys. Really honest.
May I call you Ian?
Absolutely. Yeah. Cool.
Okay, Ian. I was reading some of your information, and it seems to me that what I want to ask is, did you not realize you had these abilities, that you were a medium early on? Did it just all of a sudden happen one day, or did it just become more prevalent at one particular peak?
That's interesting. I had some early experiences, Steve. Actually, after I published my book, my one and only book, so as far as I was concerned, it happened in 2003 when a patient came into my office and started giving me messages from my dead grandfather. That sort of seemed to unlock something, and I went on this crazy journey where I ended up training as a medium, and I've now used that in my everyday working life. But actually, I had some early experiences when I was a teenager, and actually, I had a very early experience, which I didn't even put in my books. I didn't realize. So I actually had a near-death experience at the age of 9, and I really think, subsequently, obviously, I've been doing a lot of reading. I really think that may have something to do with it. I mean, I haven't told this story before, but I'll tell you now if you want to hear it.
Oh, yes.
So when I was a kid, I used to faint. I used to pretend to have sore throats, because every time I got a sore throat, my darling mother would send me to bed. I'd stay off school, and she'd give me a bowl of tomato soup and a buttered roll. So I like that. So I thought, well, okay, that's good. I'll do that again.
It was always tomato soup when you were ill, wasn't it?
Mine's tomato soup and a butter.
Yeah, I used to get that.
It was lovely. Well,
No, wait a second. It was soup and what?
Tomato soup. Whenever you were ill, I know. In those days.
I know the tomato soup, but what else did she give you?
A roll, bread roll, but with butter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it was lovely. So I used to sort of, every time I fancied time off school, I said I had a sore throat. So she used to take me to the doctor, and the doctor would look in my throat, give me some penicillin, because, to be honest, you can look in the throat, half the time it always looks red anyway. So in those days, they'd give you penicillin at the drop of a hat. And what I didn't realise was that if you have enough sore throats, they eventually will take your tonsils out. So I ended up, I remember going to see this ENT surgeon. These are the guys who actually wear the head mirror. In those days, they had a head mirror on, a little hole in it they looked through, and a little spirit lamp. And, they reflected the light down your throat. And I remember him saying, those tonsils have got to come out. I remember thinking, oh, shit, what have I done? I was 9. Anyway, so I ended up in my local hospital, which is the North Middlesex Hospital. I had my tonsils out, which was they don't do that now, but it was a fairly standard procedure. But what they do is they take a guillotine, there's the tonsils at the back of your throat. They literally cut them off. I mean, you're anaesthetized. And most cases, it's okay.
Are you sure they don't do that now?
Well, they do it if you need it, but it's not done routinely. I mean, our day, when we were kids, everybody had their tonsils out. But anyway, so they and of course, what you're looking forward to is the ice cream. I never got the bloody ice cream. But anyway, what did happen was that I started to bleed from where they cut the tonsils, and I was losing a lot of blood, and I was bringing up blood. So I don't think I definitely wasn't dying, because they had to wait for Mum and Dad to have to sign the consent form to have a second operation. But I was quite ill. I remember sort of feeling really quite unwell. So I had to go down to the operating theatre and have another anaesthetic. And whilst I was under I always thought it was an anaesthetic dream. I had this dream. Now, in this experience, but it's very vivid and stayed with me all my life. So it was as if I was in a black place in a tunnel. Imagine a black polytunnel, the sort of thing that gardeners have. It's got like little wire hoops in it, but black. So it's like a ribbed tunnel. And I was in this.
Yeah, I've got a white one in the garden. They're like a big plastic round tent.
Yeah, but it's like a tube, and it's got ring reinforcements around it. But imagine so I'm in a big.
Don't have them over there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I'm in a big ribbed tunnel, and coming out of the center of my abdomen is this huge stalk, which looks like molten glass. Imagine molten glass being pulled out of a furnace and being twisted around. Yeah. Like a very, very thick umbilical cord, but really thick. And it was sort of twisting out of me and going down the tunnel. And on the end of it was a tiny, tiny little but very bright spark. I remember knowing that actually I was that little bright spark on the end of that stalk, even though I felt that my body was sort of where the stalk was coming from. I felt I was in my body. I knew that I actually was this little bright spark. And it was twisting gently, slowly down this tunnel. And as it went, and the tunnel curved to the left, and as it went to the left, then I lost consciousness. Now, okay, I mean, I thought that was a dream, but I used to tell people that story about the day I almost died and I had this weird dream. So, I mean, I didn't think much.
It does sound like similar to what people report on near-death experiences.
To it. I mean, you don't have to have all the elements of it, but I've always thought, that's my consciousness was on the end of that. Anyway, so I was 9 at the time. Fast forward 14 years. So I'm 23. I was doing my GP training scheme. So yeah, in the UK, just to clear up things, we're called primary care physicians are called GPs, general practitioners. And the way we get trained in the UK is when you've got your medical degree, you go on a GP training scheme. And I went on a GP training scheme, and it happened to be at my local hospital, the North Middlesex Hospital. So, and what you do is you do a series of jobs, and I was doing an OBGYN job. And obs and gynae job, we call it here, but you know it as OBGYN in the States. And in those days, we're talking about early 80s. I was on call. I was the resident doctor on call. And what would happen is if a woman would come in, say she'd had a baby and some placental bits and pieces were lying around, she was bleeding, I'd prep her, call the anaesthetist, and we do a quick D&C just to clear out the womb. So one evening I was on call, and I phoned the anaesthetist and booked, to say, can you help me with this case? He said, sure. So you have to book the operating theatre. So I phoned the operating theatre, and they said, okay, well, look, doctor, I'm sorry, but you can't use the regular theatre. It's being closed for refurbishment. You have to go to a different place. I didn't know where it was, so someone came and showed me where it was. And I said, so it's round the back of the nurses' quarters. And as I went in there, and I walked into this operating room, and I had this most peculiar feeling. I felt like, I've been here before. And I said to the woman who was showing me there, I said, I've been here before. She said, you can't possibly have been here before. It's been mothballed for 10 years. And we've only got it out so we can refurbish the modern suite. She said it was the old paediatric ENT theatre. So that was actually, it would have been the room where I'd have had my operation.
Oh.
And now the thing is, how did I know that? Because every operating theatre looks the same, more or less. As a kid, I wouldn't have been awake. I mean, you get anaesthetised in the anteroom, then they put you into the operating theatre. So I wouldn't have known that. So that just makes. So I mean, that was something that, looking back, that was a weird experience, which makes me think that there was something psychic, definitely not quite normal going on there. And I just wonder if in fact it was what you would call a near-death experience, because one thing we know is that people who have near-death experiences tend to, whatever happens to them, and they don't have to be at death's door to have a near-death experience. Although I was quite ill afterwards. I mean, I was really quite pale and was unwell for a good few months afterwards. But you don't have to have a proper near-death experience, where your heart stops. But they tend to come back with gifts. So maybe I had that. And then
like a psychic gift, yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the veil is, between the two worlds is thinner. And then I had a couple of other experiences, which I probably mentioned before, but I'll tell you the one that's most impressive was when I was 19. And I mean, I've told this story millions of times before, but it repays telling. You've probably have you ever heard of transfiguration experiences?
Morphing, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, for people who don't know it, I mean, the idea is that a spirit medium, a psychic medium, their features change and take on.
Before you go on, Ian, I done that in front of a television crew once, and I scared the crap out of them, especially the cameraman, because he saw it.
Right. Well, that's pretty good, because the stuff I've seen subsequently has not been that impressive. But I was at my friend Nick's house, and his this was the first summer at my university, summer '74. So I was at my friend Nick's house with my sister. Yeah. And Nick's girlfriend, Felicity, was staying with him. And I mean, she had long brown hair and dark complexion. And I'm speaking to her, and all of a sudden there's this blonde-haired snow queen staring at me with sort of shoulder-length blonde hair, a fringe. I mean, what I think you call bangs in the States, we call it a fringe over here. And very, very clear blue eyes and high cheekbones and very thick, slightly distorted lips, like they were coated in white frosted lipstick. And I got what now we call a download. But of course, in summer '74, that term didn't exist. And it was instantly knowing that it was like, mark this, know there's more to life than meets the eye, and one day you'll understand. And with that, my sister, who was only age 15, started screaming at the top of her voice, "My God, can you see those lips?" And I turned around to see my sister, and she was absolutely hysterical. Now, she caught Felicity's profile, and what she was most impressed with were these very distorted, like partially formed, thick
Botox type lips.
Exactly, yes. But again, exactly. So we jumped into my dad's car.
I call him a duck's bum over here.
Well, yeah. But I mean, so we jumped into my dad's car, woke my parents up. They told us to go back home and don't be silly. And that's actually how I met. The next day I told my friends, and one of my friends introduced me to a medium called Keith Hudson, who told me that what I'd seen was transfiguration. Now, I didn't believe it at the time. He said, well, that was a spirit guide. And I thought, well, there's no way. I don't believe in spirit guides and this stuff. It must have been a hallucination. But of course, if it's a hallucination, how come my sister saw it? So, I mean, I was in a double bind because I was at the first year at medical school. I was heavily into science, and science said this didn't happen. And yet I'd clearly seen something. If it wasn't a spirit guide, it was a hallucination, which we've both seen, which means telepathy is real. So there's no way out of it. It's either spirit guides or telepathy. Yeah. So what do? I mean, you just put that to one side. So that's my early experiences, Steve.
Well, that first one, it sounded. Now, I have very few experiences myself, but I know others have talked about that silver cord that sort of connects the body to the soul or whatever when they go out of body, and that made me think of that pillar or that connection that you saw might be something like that.
Yeah, the interesting thing was it was like a ginormous, I mean, really thick, twisty molten glass. Or actually think about it like an umbilical cord. But again, I was 9. I mean, I've delivered babies. I know what umbilical cords look like. Look like a really, really thick umbilical cord. I mean, half the size of your abdomen. But I mean, at 9 years old, I didn't know any of that stuff.
Sure. So it wouldn't have been anything to do with ectoplasm, I wouldn't think, because if that's something real, that seems to solidify and become, substance. So it doesn't seem like that would be it.
No, it was definitely an internal experience because I was having anesthetized. I mean, but the thing is, I mean, I always put it down to a dream, but it's only looking back at it and thinking, well, how am I, the things that happened to me in my life, and then looking back, I think, yeah, maybe that was significant actually. But it all kicked off in 2003, and that's more or less that is exactly when I started training as a medium. Really, I was 47 then.
And you think it's possible, and it does seem that a lot of people have had various types of traumatic experiences, and that was the thing that triggered their abilities. Prior to that, they really didn't have it, but afterwards it sort of opened the door a bit.
Well, in my case, the traumatic experience was I was having a big bust up with my family, which really actually was never repaired. I have to say, I fell out with my sister and my parents, and my wife and I were basically disowned from the family. Now, the interesting thing is, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because it all ties in. I traced it down. I realized that my cousins all had the same problem with their parents. I come from a very large family. And being a primary care physician, a GP, I've done a lot of family work. And I realized that the problem probably lay back in several generations before. And I realized that my maternal grandfather, he was a Polish Jewish immigrant. So he came over to the UK at the turn of the 20th century and did very well for himself. He was a baker and he set up a couple of shops in the East End of London, and he'd have done even better, but for the fact that he was a gambler. And at the end of the week, he'd put his hand in the till, take the money out and go blow it on the horses. So, I mean, that caused problems in the family to do with trust with men and the older sibling in various families. And I psychologized my family and worked out what it was. And I'd been thinking about my grandfather because I was really suffering. I mean, I was really quite close to my family and having gone through this terrible trauma. And so when this patient, Keith Bishop, came into my room and looked at me and said, I've got this man here. Is your grandfather, the one you never met?
Was he a medium, this Keith Bishop?
Absolutely, but he didn't tell me at the time. I didn't know. So Keith Bishop, I'm still friendly with him. He was a patient of mine. He actually worked at the BBC TV Centre, and he'd been a security guard there. And he was so good, such a nice guy, that he used to help all the VIPs who visited BBC TV Centre, and he had to be cleared by the Ministry of Defence because some of these people were really important. So he had MOD clearance, and he was very, very good with people, and he had a lot of names in the pocketbook. And eventually when he left, they said, look, Keith, why don't you set up on your own? You're very good, you help us out a lot. And he set up a PR company. So when I knew him, he was running a PR company. He looked after Nick Faldo, the golfer, a couple of other page 3 Sun girls he looked after. They weren't major celebrities, but he was doing quite well. He's getting a good name for himself. And he was a lovely guy. And every time he'd come to see me, he'd tell me some showbiz gossip or stuff. So he was very entertaining. But one day he came to see me and he just looked at me and said, I've got your grandfather here. And he started to give me a message from him, which was completely to do with what was going on in my family. Plus the fact is that I'd been thinking about my grandfather and he didn't know anything about this. And then he said, of course, that he'd had these mediumistic experiences himself. And by the way, Doc, you should train as a medium. And I thought he was bonkers, actually. I mean, I thought he was just bullshitting me, to be honest. But then weird stuff started happening, odd coincidences. I mean, just weird things, strange dreams, hearing voices. And I thought I was going bonkers. And I remember speaking to one of my patients, a guy called Dave Godfrey, who was actually he's actually a shamanic healer. Lovely guy, but he had a science degree as well. He'd been a science teacher before he got into shamanic healing. So he had his feet on the ground. And I remember asking his advice because I was getting very confused. He said, Ian, you need to, get a handle on this. It will drive you nuts. So I said, what do I do? He said, well, you need to join a circle, which I'd never heard of. I said, what are they? He said, well, they're development circles. They're psychic development circles, and they're normally run in spiritualist churches. And I said, look, there's no way I'm going into anything called a church. I'm a non-practicing Jew and my wife's Hindu. We don't go into churches. And I remember him saying, he said, well, if spirit wants to work with you, it'll find a way. And the very next day, I kid you not, my wife was looking in the local newspaper and she saw a small ad for the Beacon of Light Spiritualist Church. And the reason why she noticed it was that Keith Hudson, the guy who she'd heard about but never met from when Felicity's face changed, some 27 years before that, was giving a demonstration of clairvoyance at the local spiritualist church. And she said, is that the guy you've been telling me about all these years? I said, must be. She said, well, we'll have to go. I said, I'm not going. She said, no, we'll go. Let's go. So we went there, and I sat at the back trying to make myself as inconspicuous as possible. And he started giving messages to everybody. And he looked at me and said, sir, you have a lot of knowledge around you. You don't know Unite, but you will one day. And they're telling me you're going to be writing a book about it. Now, when I first met him when I was 19, he said the very same thing but didn't mention the book. And I thought, well, I bet he says that to everybody. And I can tell you, he didn't recognize me because, you know, I haven't got any hair now, and I had a beard when I was a kid, when I was young, and a full mop of hair. So he didn't know who I was. But after the service, I went up to him and introduced myself and told him what was happening to me. He said, well, why don't you join my circle? I have the largest open circle in North London, at Vestry Road Spiritualist Church in the borough of Walthamstow, which is just a stone's throw from where I live. And you don't have to be a spiritualist. Just join in with me. And I thought, well, as it's Keith, and as I knew him before, and he seems to know what he's doing about, and it'd be a bit of fun. So I joined, and that's how I started training. And as Dave Godfrey said, Spirit found a way. And so I started sitting in circle, and then weird things started happening, and then that was fine. And then eventually it spilled over into my professional life. So I started.
How do you go about it? Because how do you go about it actually in the surgery?
Oh, well, how I go about in the surgery is, everybody.
You know, you get somebody come in with a bad foot, and next minute you'll get messages from them.
They don't come in now, but I mean, in pre-COVID days, yeah, people would come in, and I'd get this feeling that I ought to say something, and I start getting a bit edgy. But this was before the early days. I start getting, you know, when you first start with this stuff, you become a bit of a space cadet. You know, this space cadet phase when you get very enthusiastic, and you start to be open all the time to this, and you don't learn to shut it off. And a lot of people get like that. So in my space cadet, planet Earth to Ian come in, you know, you start to lose a bit of touch with it. You get overexcited, you open up all the time. And I was picking up stuff all the time, and I'd start to get a bit edgy because I didn't know how to introduce it into the consultation, if it was the right thing to do. But what would happen is I get this image in my mind. I'm very visual, and it would just glow brighter and brighter. It would be like in the back of my mind, and it'd be much more vivid than an ordinary imagination image. And I just feel I'd have to say something. And if I didn't, it would eventually fade. So I learned just to sort of drop it into the conversation. I say things like, I often get these feelings. Does this mean anything to you? And then say, oh, yeah, come to think of it. And then they would have a little conversation. And then they look at you and say, are you psychic, doctor? And I say, oh, no. But eventually, so Lucy comes into my room. This was in 2004. I've told this before, but I'll tell it again. So she's a lady I'd known for years, Irish lady. And she came into my room. She's normally bright and bubbly.
You mean your surgery?
Into my surgery, yeah, into my surgery. Surgery is what we call the office, by the way, Steve.
Okay.
In the UK. It's not a place where you operate. A surgery is the doctor's office. So it'd be like the surgery is the health centre. My surgery is my room. But so
I'm pretty well versed in watching British sitcoms and dramas, so I know some of the lingo. But go ahead.
Okay, right. So anyway, so she comes into my room and she burst into tears. And she, how old is she? She was 66 then, and normally she's very happy and cheerful, lovely. She's a lovely person, very happy. But she said, "Oh, doctor, I'm so depressed. You've got to help me." So I took a history from her, and after 15 minutes, I was scratching my head. I didn't know why she was depressed. She didn't know why she was depressed. And she said, "Look, you've got to give me something. You've got to help me." And I don't normally give antidepressants just like that, but I thought I've got nothing else to offer. She's desperate. So I typed into my computer prescription for citalopram, which is an antidepressant, and as it came out of my printer, I took the prescription out of my printer, and I felt a blow to the back of my head, and I heard a voice behind me saying, "Ask her about her father." And as I looked at her, I saw the misty outline of a man that I could describe over her left shoulder, and it was absolutely amazing. And I just stopped and said, "Lucy, tell me about your dad." And she stopped crying, looked at me, and she said, and the date, by the way, was the 6th. It was the 6th of December, 2004. It's very important. And she said, he was killed 38 years ago by the IRA. Do you think that's why I'm depressed? In fact, it was on the 8th of December. And I said, did he look like, and describe the man over his shoulder? She said, yeah, how do you know? And I said, I sort of winced and said, Lucy, I think I can see him over your left shoulder. And she grabbed me. She just leapt at me, grabbed me and said, Thank you, doctor. You don't know what this means to me. So it turns out that she's from Southern Ireland, and she was in service into a big house in Manchester. She was from, quite poor rural Ireland. So a lot of the Irish girls go to earn some money in Britain. So she was on the ferry back to Ireland to see her family. And what happened was her father, although she was Catholic, didn't like what the IRA were doing, and he'd spoken about it. And she thinks to this day that he was killed by the IRA. I mean, he was found shot, and his body was shoved in a drain, basically.
Yeah, sounds like the IRA.
Absolutely, yeah. But I mean, obviously, she's got no proof of that. Anyway, so she'd always felt that her dad was around her. But whenever she's told her family that, they said, well, we're Catholic, we're not meant to believe that. So when I actually mentioned that her father was around, that I'd seen him, this validated her feeling. Plus, of course, it would have been 2 days' time. He was killed on the 8th of December, and it was the 6th of December. So it was coming up to the anniversary. And of course, every doctor knows that the anniversary of death is very important. And of course, even if you don't remember it, you're unconsciously, you will remember that. Mm-hmm. And she said, and she stopped crying. She said, well, now I know why I'm depressed. I won't need your silly pills, doctor. And with that, so thank you very much. I walked out of my room. My jaw was on the floor, and I thought, that's it. My career is now over. Kaput, gone. She then went outside and told my receptionist, Carol, what I'd said. And I thought, this is definitely it. Anyway, nothing happened. But a month later, she comes back into my room, all smiles. I said, Lucy, what's up with you? She said, nothing. So I said, well, why are you here then? She said, I've come to tell you a story. So she sits down with a smile and said, two weeks after you gave me my message, doctor, I was in my Irish social club, and there's this creepy geezer who's got this, he says he's got the second sight. He was tugging at my coattail saying, Lucy, 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 I've got this message for you. Come into this room and I'll tell it to you. And she turned around and said, well, if you've got a message, you tell me right here in the hall. And he said, did you know there's a fellow over your left shoulder? I think he's your father. And she put her hands on her hip and said, of course I did. My doctor told me that 2 weeks ago. She said, you know what? That sure took the wind out of his sails. But she came back to tell me, just to validate my message, in much the same way that I'd validated the fact that she felt her father was around her. Now, that was absolutely amazing. It saved the National Health Service the cost of a antidepressant. It cured her instantly of a depression, and it absolutely transformed her life. I mean, to the point where, I still see her. When I give a lecture on my experiences, I gave a lecture in Enfield, and she came with her son. At the end of the lecture, I shook my hand and said, "You don't know how this transformed our whole family." The word got around, and it just opened our eyes to the possibilities, and that was just incredible. So, and that was 2004. So I just started training. I started sitting in.
It's things like that make it all worthwhile, isn't it?
Oh, it's absolutely. Absolutely. So that was, I've been training for just under a year then. And then things like that happened. So word got around that Dr. Rubenstein, well, let's call him Dr. Frankenstein, he's doing all this weird stuff. So things got around. And of course, my big problem was worrying about the General Medical Council. That's like our medical board, Steve, over here. They're going to get wind of this. What happened? So, and of course, I did get a complaint, but the complaint was not what I thought. So this woman came into my room with a sore knee. So I looked at her knee, had it for a couple of weeks. I examined her knee. I made a diagnosis and I gave her the appropriate treatment. And she then left my room, promptly complained to my practice manager. And the complaint was, my father-in-law died 2 weeks ago and Dr. Rubenstein didn't give me a message from him. and that, so I'd been lying in bed at night, worrying about my career, thinking, if word gets around, I'm going to be, this is going to be terrible. But actually,
struck off. Yeah.
What I realized, of course, was that I suddenly realized that the way I saw the world as a doctor with my Western scientific medical training, which I thought was normal, is actually not the way most of my patients see it. And I'm not denigrating my patients. A lot of my patients are not educated to university level. That doesn't matter. There's still decent, people with common sense. But because of my education, my worldview is not the same as their worldview. And a lot of the people I look after just accept it as, well, of course, this stuff happens and it's real. And I'm actually more skeptical than my patients. And I give these messages, say, well, I don't know if it's real or not. And they look at me saying, well, you're crazy, doc. I'll give you another example. This is quite recent. I've got a guy called Vic, and I'm using their names because these patients don't mind. I've got permission from them. So Vic had a cough. So he came to see me. He had a cough. He's in his 60s. Cough that wouldn't get better. So I gave him some treatment. Didn't get better. Sent him for a chest X-ray. Not much on the chest X-ray, but this cough is going on. Well, now you're getting worried. You're going to send this guy to a respiratory physician. They're going to do a bronchoscopy and look inside. He has that done. All okay. CT scan, nothing there. And this was going on for a year. And this guy was coughing and coughing and coughing. And I had the results of the CT scan. He didn't know the results of the CT scan. This had been a year, and he was coming to see me. And I was going to tell him his CT scan was normal, which is what he didn't want to hear. He wanted a diagnosis and a treatment. So he came into my room, and I said, Vic, I'm happy to tell you that your CT scan's okay. We can't find anything. And he just looked terribly glum and said, well, what do I do about this cough? It's driving me mad. So I didn't know what to do, but I thought, well, okay, let's broaden, having excluded anything, physically serious. Let's take a broader view. And I said, well, did anything happen to you around about the time the cough started? He said, no. And then he said, well, actually, my brother-in-law, Ken, died. And as he said it, I felt this instant link. And I had these images. Now, Vic actually was interested in my mediumship. A lot of my patients know this now. So I said, look, Vic, I think I might be picking up something. Can I just give you some images? I don't know what they mean. He said, sure, please. So I saw these, a row of miniature whiskey bottles. And I said, can you take those? Does that mean anything to you? He said, yeah. He said, Ken used to collect miniature whiskey bottles. And the minute I give an image which the person can take, that forges the link, makes it even stronger. And then a load of other images came. And I was sitting in a pub with him, and I could see that he'd go out and have drinks, go to the pub with him. Yeah, that was confirmed. Then I was in a workshop, and I could describe it. There were manuals. There were these strange instruments on the workshop, which I couldn't really describe very well. I didn't know what they were. And I said, I'm sure I'm in contact with Ken. And I'm in his workshop. It's in a shed, and they're very odd-looking instruments, like large sort of scoop-like things. He said, yeah, he makes heart spoons, which I've never heard of. These are like large, curved spoon-like objects, which they use for taking hearts when they're doing out of cadavers when they're doing heart transplants. And he specializes in making baby spoons for baby heart transplants. Not many people do them. They're made to size. So this is a very skilled job. And then I could see a row of books, but I knew they were technical manuals and that Ken really wasn't much for reading. Yeah, again, he was confirmed with that. And then I could see a green field with these little flags, like little triangular flags in them. And I could describe this field. I could describe these flags on poles. I didn't know what the hell they were. And I could describe this. To one end was a ditch and an embankment. And as I said that, he just laughed. He said, well, I said, what am I saying? He said, no one. He said, you can't possibly know this. I've told nobody. He said, you're describing the golf course that we scattered Ken's ashes on. But that was, we weren't meant to do that. Okay, so I said, well, I don't know where I'm picking these up from. And Vic said, well, I do. You're in touch with Ken. So I said, okay, if that helps you, that's fine. He said, well, that's lovely. Thank you. So at the end of the consultation, he left. And then I said, well, come and see me in a month. And I was actually dreading seeing him in a month because I didn't know what to do for his cough. So he came in. I said, how are you doing, Ken? Vic? He said, I'm cured. I said, what do you mean you're cured? I said, who killed you? I said, you did. I said, what do you mean I cured you? I didn't do anything. He said, after you gave me that message, I got home. I felt an immediate lifting from my chest. And within 3 days, my cough had gone and it hasn't come back. And it hasn't come back to this day. So, I mean, I said to him, well, maybe it was just the fact that you worked out what the cause of your cough was. Maybe it wasn't the message. And he said, well, you could think what you like, Doc, but as far as I'm concerned, you were in touch with Ken. I know he's around and he's okay. So that's really, the power of this thing, whether it's real or not. I mean, I'd like to think it is, but with my scientific hat on, there's always a little bit of me that's skeptical, because that's just the way, in science, you never prove anything. You only ever disprove something. All I can say is as I've got more and more into it, I haven't actually been able to disprove the spirit hypothesis. I mean, and it's a bit like, quantum physics. I'm not saying with quantum physics, quantum physicists use quantum physics. They don't know how the hell it works, but they just say, well, it's just a mathematical theory and it gives results. And they did that for years, and eventually they said, well, there's obviously something about the universe which is real in this. So I use it in the same way, and it's just a technique that gives results, and it helps people, so I'll do it. But as I've got to use it more and more, I think, well, maybe it's more than just a technique. Maybe there is an underlying reality to it. And of course, in my head, I talk to my spirit guides, and I do my meditation, all this stuff. So yes, it's I lead this weird double life. But at first, it was very hard to integrate the two. But as time's gone, I've successfully integrated it, and helped very much by the acceptance of my patients and my colleagues, I have to say.
I just wanted to mention a couple of things. One thing I noticed is that it was a series of serendipitous events that led you to where you were. I mean, it wasn't just chance. I mean, these things fell into place for a particular reason, I think. And also, I noticed that, nowadays it's not unusual to look at mental turmoil or discord or some aspect of consciousness that is responsible for a physical ailment, when back in the old days, that was thought of as being ridiculous. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say being ridiculous. I mean, there's always been this strand in medicine of looking at that. I mean, I was brought up as a doctor. I've always been interested in the psychological aspects. I mean, when I was at school, I used to hypnotize kids at school. Boy, that must have been fun. Well, it was great. I mean, I saw this book of this. I saw a book in the bookshop, and it had this swooning woman with this man holding a cigarette standing over her. And I thought, I'll have some of that, please. That looks good when you're a 14-year-old boy. So I learned to hypnotize the kids at school. And I was a librarian at school because I went to a rough school, and the only way you could get out of being beaten up in the playground was by going into the library. So I was quite I was very studious. And I was a bit overweight, so I wasn't the most obviously popular kid in the school. I mean, in those days, you had to have long hair and thin and smoke dope. It was talk about the 60s and 70s. But once I started hypnotizing people, I hypnotized the most popular boy in the school, and this was a guy called Alan Stockbridge, who was a hippie, and he used to tell everybody about his acid trips. So I said, you don't need acid. I can do it with hypnosis. So I hypnotized him, and he had the best trip of his life. And he told all his mates. And from that point on, all the kids would come up into the library to be hypnotized. And I was thinking, this is great. So they were queuing along the corridor. I mean, I was hypnotizing. I was doing, making their arms rigid so the school football captain couldn't bend this weak girl's arm. I was doing all sorts of stuff, giving post-hypnotic commands. It was brilliant.
You were very popular.
And of course, the school head teacher found, they noticed there was something odd because people were queuing up in the corridor. They were walking out in a trance, the teacher realized there was something going on. So Mrs. Lambert, who was the school deputy head, she was ever so nice. She called me into her room. She said, now look, listen here. And she said, I've got a degree in psychology, so I do believe in hypnosis, but you can't do this at school. Wait until you get to medical school. Now, I didn't even know I was going to medical school. They'd obviously, the teachers had realised that I was going to go to medical school, whether I wanted to or not. So I said, okay. She said, and by the way, sign this letter. And she's written this disclaimer. And looking back, I think she was really ahead of her time. She was covering her ass in paperwork. And then, of course, we all do that as doctors. Everybody signing disclaimers and covering your ass with paperwork. But she was one of the first people I know who actually covered her ass in paperwork. So that was very good. And when I went to medical school, of course, there was nothing, didn't mention it at all. But I got into hypnosis again when I was doing OBGYN. So I was doing the gynecology part of my obs and gynae job. And we had a lady who had a hysterectomy. And she'd been catheterized. And every time we took the catheter out, she went into urinary retention. So you had to recatheterize her. She couldn't leave the hospital until she could empty her bladder. And she was quite a tense lady. And so I had this surgeon, Miss Witts. And in the UK, we don't call our surgeons doctor. They take the title Mr., Miss, or Mrs. So Miss Witt, who was quite sergeant major of a lady surgeon. She was a good surgeon, but the junior doctors didn't really like her. I got on with her okay. And she said, well, how are we going to discharge her? She's blocking her bed. So I said, look, do you mind if I try hypnosis? She said, no, I'll try anything. So I hypnotized her, and we managed to relax her enough to get her bladder working again. And Miss Witt was so impressed that when I left my hospital jobs and was a trainee in general practice. I was still a doctor, but I was training in primary care physicians. I was a year at a local health centre. And she sent me patients. And I think I was the only trainee to have private patients because I see them privately. So I used to do a lot of hypnosis. And I did a lot of hypnosis when I first joined my practice in 1984. But I mean, the hypnosis takes time and it's quite tiring. And I stopped doing that as my job got busier. But the point was, Stephen, is that, there is this strand in medicine where we do recognise that a lot of what we see has got a psychological component. So I don't think of the body and mind as separate. I mean, I think now my view is body, mind and soul are different, how can I put it, like different octaves on the same spectrum. You can play notes on a piano, then you play the same notes higher up a scale and you go up a scale. And I think of there's the mental and maybe the spiritual and the psychic, and they're all different octaves on the piano. And there's the physical, and disease can be manifest in different areas of them, and they can interact with each other. So you can deal with a spiritual crisis can be manifested physically, and you can treat it physically, and that can help the spiritual crisis, and vice versa. So you choose the level at which you want to work at, and sometimes you have to work at both levels.
That's amazing.
But that's the trouble with modern medicine is now. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love science. I love medicine, but one of the problems is that it's becoming a very technical matter. I mean, there's an awful lot you can do technically that would have been science fiction when I qualified, and it's amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. I mean, laser eye surgery, heart transplants. Just incredible stuff that can be done. And the trouble is, it's so technically demanding. It turns you into a technician. So I spend a lot of my time now being told to check up on this on the computer, make sure this drug's okay. And it's good. It's good medicine. But to be honest, and some doctors love it. I mean, I can do it. But for me, I'm more interested in the interface. When I went into general practice, it was because there was this interface between the emotions, the mind, and the physical and the social. Of course, what's happened now in the UK...
doctors in those days used to know their patients, didn't they?
Yes.
Going to doctor's surgery now, it's a different doctor every time.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I know my
patients. Got to go through it all over and over.
Well, this is the problem, and it's happening now, especially with COVID. I mean, I feel sorry for the young doctors because not only, if you go into general practice now, not only do you not know your patients, the system set up by the government to encourage either to email you or to this, that, and the other. And it's great. It's good. It's very convenient. But it's a bit like medicine, like McDonald's. It's fast medicine. It's not like a hearty meal. And I can't see them ever getting to know their patients like I did. I mean, when I first started in general practice, I had my own list and I would be on call. And then if I was on call, I'd stay in the surgery till 10 o'clock. And I mean, how I got friendly with Keith Bishop was if I was on call and he was very anxious about his job. So I used to sit in the surgery for an hour and a half with him while I was on call. And he'd just tell me about his day and we talk about things and he'd find that very helpful. I used to do a lot of
I remember them days when you would go to a doctor and they'd sit and listen to you. Now you get 5-10 minutes and they're not really listening. They're not really listening. I'm sorry, but they're not.
No, but it's difficult.
And like I say, every day, every time you go to the doctors, you've got to go through all your ailments again because it's a different doctor sitting in front of you.
Yeah, and that's very much driven by society.
Yeah, you just feel like you're not even a number. You know.
The other thing that's happened, because it's different in the States, because the States have never had a strong primary. So in the UK, Steve, everything goes through primary care. So you can't go and see a specialist directly. You have to go through to a general practitioner, and we deal with everything. And then that
happens a lot here too. It just depends. Okay. But I've had to do jump through a few hoops to get to where I needed to go.
Because you have HMOs now, which now because it's actually a more efficient. Well, it's a cheaper way of doing it, and it's probably actually saves more waste. But what's happened in the UK, is that as specialists have become more specialised, a lot of the stuff they used to do in hospitals, they don't do anymore. It's been moved out from hospitals into primary care. So a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with now, like hypertension clinics, diabetes clinics, in the old days, they'd be a consultant, a specialist at the hospital to deal with that. Now we have to deal with that. And now we have to treat blood fats, lipids, and all this stuff. So there's a lot of the stuff we're doing now would have been done by specialists, are now done by GPs. But of course, there's all the other stuff that GPs used to do hasn't gone away. And that's actually why this is happening. And I don't know what the answer is. Nothing stays the same. I can see medicine splitting, perhaps, that you'll have when you get Star Trek medicine, and it could be just around the corner. I can imagine you'd have a machine that would just fix you. You go into the machine, it rebuilds you. One day it might happen. I mean, who knows? But so will that be a doctor? Would that be like a med tech? What would a doctor be? We've always had a person.
That would be a technician programming a computer, which will zap you.
but now let's talk about real medicine. Every culture has got medicine men, someone you go to. A shaman. I think it's sort of the general practice that I practice, I call like suburban shamanism. What does a shaman do? Shaman, you call them in the States, they call them shaman. A shaman is someone you come to with an illness, and the shaman goes on a spirit journey, consults with the spirits, and then brings back a cure. What do you do when you see your GP? You come with a problem. The GP either consults, in my case, I consult Google, or I might consult a specialist at the hospital.
Do you know something? The amount of doctors that told me, don't Google.
No, I Google. I think my page could be Dr. Google. I look at it all. So I go on this journey. I get it, and hopefully come back with a cure. I mean, it's very much every culture has this. So I think that if the medical profession drops that, someone else will pick it up, because you need people like that. Someone who's the other thing about the shaman is they live in this liminal zone between this world and the next. GPs, primary care physicians, live in this liminal zone. I live in the same world as my patients. I don't work in a hospital, but I communicate with the hospital, and I deal with the interface of all different things. And that really sort of ties in with mediumship. So I just think that the mediumship is actually a natural extension of being a GP, and I'd love to introduce it more, but I mean, quite frankly, I can't see that happening. But I've got a lot of. I'm sure mediumship has got a lot to offer therapeutics, but I don't do spiritual healing per se. I mean, I might do without knowing it. I think I've got a healing guide, but I keep that separate because that sort of is muddying the waters. I mean, people come to me for Western allopathic medicine, it's called, and they get that, but they get a little bit of mediumship, and that seems to be helpful, really.
Well, it's probably hard to differentiate sometimes. If we go back to the turn of the last century, around the time of the Fox sisters and spiritualism and theosophy, there were several religions that came up at that time, like, the Unity School of Christianity, Christian Science, religious science, that were very based in it was spiritual healing, but they looked at mental causes sometimes for the physical ailments. I wondered if you've ever looked into any of that. It's really a fascinating history.
Yes.
But so many like Dr. Norman Vincent Peale got some of his ideas from there, Dr. Wayne Dyer and so forth. So this is kind of a new thing that's never really been new, if you know what I mean.
And in fact, when I was interesting enough, I used to it's interesting. I used to read these books when I was a kid, and my wife points out that why were you reading self-help books when you were a kid? I mean, I came from a nice family. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I was brought up nice. It wasn't any serious trauma in my background, but there was obviously something in my family, because I used to be very much drawn. I go to the local library and I'd look at the self-help philosophy, occult section when I was a kid, and I used to read all these books. I mean, that's because when you get into hypnosis, you come across Norman Vincent Peale, Power of Positive Thinking, and this sort of thing.
Oh, sure.
And of course, the classic British occultist Dion Fortune, she actually was. I mean, her book Psychic Self-Defense, and she talks about her psychological trauma that opened her up. And of course, I mean, this is something which the CIA know. I mean, we all know about the CIA experiments that and this the idea of the Montauk kids. The idea being that you traumatize people to the point where they begin to open up psychically. So what's that about? And my theory is, and you look at mediums, and most of them are wounded in some way psychologically. And what I say to people when I'm talking about this, I say, well, what happens to people like this is that they're often have been attacked by people who are trying to feed off their energy. And these psychic vampires, as I call them, they use them as to feed off their energy, and they do it by knocking a hole in your aura, if such a thing is possible, to take your energy out. But of course, when they knock a hole in your aura, it also lets the light in. So maybe there's something there.
That was a fascinating book. I did read her book years ago, Psychic Self-Defense.
Yes.
And I think that was a pseudonym. I don't know what her actual name was, but and I know she's written many other books.
Name. Yeah, very English name. I can't remember. Yes,
but recommended. It was. I remember it being fascinating.
Yeah. So yes, so that's so of course now what happened with me is that all was ticking along quite nicely until COVID came along, and then everything moved on to Zoom. And so how do you
yes.
So I mean, I was always very skeptical about doing psychic readings over the phone or over video link, but I mean, why? I don't know, because I mean, the whole point is there's no such thing as time or space, so why should that, once you forge the link, it shouldn't make a difference. So I was in a home circle, a development circle, which I was going to and doing quite nicely there. And then when COVID hit, we decided to meet on Zoom. And I discovered I could give perfectly decent readings over Zoom. In fact, I have to say, I think they're better because as a medium, what you don't really want, I mean, when you're in front of a person, you pick up cues from their body language. I mean, that's called cold reading, and you do it unconsciously. You'll say something, you'll see them move or anything. Oh, yeah. You can't help yourself. And the thing about mediumship is once you start doing that, it muddies the waters because your conscious mind can veer away from the real message. So you start making assumptions that aren't real. Whereas what you're meant to do is just not close your eyes and just see what's going on in your mind and give out that image and see where it leads you. So with what I discovered is when you do a reading over a video link, you haven't got that feedback and you actually get a purer reading. So, and so just before we all shut down for COVID and moved to more remote working, I was seeing this lady, Carol, in my surgery. Her mother had died. Mother died in October 2019, and I was getting some really good stuff through from her, quite evidential, and I promised her I'd give her another reading, and she emailed me. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't. I was hoping to see you because you would give me some really good evidence." So she's actually a Facebook friend of mine. So I FaceTimed her and said, "Well, actually, why don't we try it over video?" So I gave her a reading over video, and it was quite phenomenal because because I'm in my house and she's in her house. So if I give her a message about, "Oh, your mum left you this," she could say, "Hang on, I've got mum's stuff here. I can look at it." So I gave her one message. So I was saying to Carol, your mum's showing me a handbag. So she said, "Well, mum's got handbags." I said, "No, it's a specific handbag, but I couldn't describe it very well. She wants you to open it." She says, "Oh, okay. Well, I think mum might have a handbag somewhere." And then I said, "Okay, well, that image is gone." And then I saw a charm necklace. Now, I'd never heard of a charm necklace. It was like a charm bracelet, like a little bracelet which you wear around your wrist with little charms on them, little ornaments on them.
Yeah,
but this was like
I know the charm bracelet. I've never heard of a charm necklace either.
Said it's like a charm with larger charms and something you drape around your neck with a long chain. I said, "Well, I want to talk about a charm necklace, but I've never heard of them before." And she said, "Mum's got one." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah." So she got it out. I said, "Well, she wants you to look at the charms because I've been talking about a handbag." She said, and I remember I said, "Mum wants you to open up a handbag." So
There's a handbag charm on it.
It was a handbag charm. So I said, and she was there. I could see her over Zoom. So I said, "Well, does it open?" She said, "Yeah, it does." I said, "Well, open it." She opened it up. I said, "What's inside?" She said, "There's a little silver flat plate in it." And she took it out, and on it was like a little envelope, and it said a little looked like a letter in an envelope. And she opened it up, and it said, "I love you." And she just burst into tears. And that's exactly, I'd had the handbag, which I couldn't place. And then I'd been shown the charm necklace, which I couldn't place, but we found it. And the handbag was on the charm next. And there was a note. We said, I love you. So she's now taken that, and her sister made her a little chain, which she wears around her neck. And that is absolutely phenomenal, isn't it? I mean, that is so healing.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
I
nice.
think we both teared up a bit over that, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, I've got to contact her again because I'm due to give her another message. But unfortunately, the second wave has really taken it out of me. There's been so many deaths, and so many of my patients have been ill that I've been a bit low in energy, to be honest.
Yeah, you must be feeling.
Well, it is amazing, the revelation that the distance and the connection doesn't diminish what you can do and the messages that you get.
Yeah. I mean, what I found interesting was the idea that the lack of cues prevents you from doing unconscious cold reading. You get a better reading, which is something which I did not expect. So that's the gift that COVID's given me, to be honest. And the other thing that's happened is that because I'm 65 now, and for years I've been thinking, I'm going to have to retire one day. And every time I say it, I don't really want to retire because I miss my patients. But work's getting more and more onerous, and I'm getting older and more tired. But every time I say that, I was thinking that I knew that I was going to be in my mid-60s. There'd be a big task for me. And I just knew it. There'd be a big task for me. So when COVID hit, I realized this was the big task. Actually, there'd been a couple of things I had to do at work. They've been quite big in the last couple of years. But COVID's fairly big. And it just occurs to me that, whenever there's a massive loss of life, and I mean, right now we've had more people die in the UK than were killed in the Blitz when the Germans bombed the UK. So it's the largest loss of life since the Second World War, despite what the conspiracy theorists say.
They say it's over 100,000, don't
Absolutely, yeah. And whenever there's massive loss of life, you think about in between the two world wars, mediumship has always become very popular.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if there's going to be a resurgence of mediumship, because people, when this is over, and hopefully the vaccine will get us out of it, when it's over, I just think maybe there'll be so many people looking for messages from their loved ones that maybe that'll be a job for mediums. I don't know. Maybe there's more work to do, to be honest.
I know that sales of Ouija boards always have skyrocketed during different world wars. And we got that. There was a gentleman on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files that runs the company that sells all kinds of games, including Ouija boards, which I'm not too partial to. But yes, that's people are always looking for a means of communication when their loved ones have been lost.
Interesting you mentioned Ouija boards, Steve, because I've got a story about that. So that's the other weird thing that happened to me. How old was I? About 16. So when I was 16, I was living in this large Victorian house in London. And on a Saturday night, my friends would come to my house, and we'd get the Ouija board out. Actually, what we got was Scrabble letters. Do you have Scrabble in the States?
Yes.
Game? Yeah. So we put Scrabble letters in a circle on a dining table. We get a glass, and just put our fingers on a glass.
We used to call that Toby Black.
Oh, right.
What I used to do was write all the letters on pieces of paper.
Yeah.
And put the letters round in a circle, and then the glass upside down. Yeah.
So we do that, and then one evening it was summer and it was raining, so we closed the windows, and it was quite warm. And just to make things even more warmer, to add to the atmosphere, I'd get my had a little gas canister Bunsen burner from my chemistry set, so we'd have that sort of as a flickering flame in the dark. That was quite nice. And we started getting this message, and the message was water in the light, danger, water in the light, danger. And that's what we got, water in the light, danger. And so we looked at each other and we said, well, this is getting boring. Let's put the letters away. And I said, okay, I'll make some coffee. So I left the living room where we'd been doing the Ouija session in, walked down into the kitchen and turned the lights on in the kitchen. And there was this peculiar yellowish cast of the light. Couldn't work out what it was. Looked up at the lights, and it was a goldfish bowl light in the kitchen ceiling. It was half filled with water.
Oh, no.
Absolutely. And what happened is that my parents had gone out for the evening, and they'd left the window in the bathroom open. The bathroom was above the kitchen.
Oh,
and of course,
no.
the rain had blown through the wall, hit the bathroom, and it hit the wall and then gone down between the grouting between where the bath joined the wall, and the rain had flowed through into the floorboards and found the wiring as water off does come through. Now, I just looked up and just went, ah! And everybody came out. And we just looked at it because truly the Ouija board had spoken the truth. And it had given us a message. It actually had given us a warning.
I don't suppose they gave you the name of a plumber.
No, well, I was too young. I left that up to my dad. But I mean, that was pretty good. And that actually was a warning. So, I mean, I know you shouldn't encourage Ouija boards, but my experience has been obviously a sort of positive from that, really. You know, someone was trying to get a message through to me. So, yeah, I mean, when I tell these stories, of course, when I look back on it, I think, yeah, this stuff is real. It's absolutely real. I mean, it absolutely happened. The big problem I've still got is this little skeptical bit inside me that won't go away that says, yeah, but it could have been, you know. And I guess I'll always have that. Yeah, there we go.
I actually had a... go ahead.
No, it's just I just wish I could embrace it wholeheartedly and say, yes, I truly know that when I die, there is this afterlife, and my heart believes it, but my head says, yeah, it could be, you know, never mind.
The only I did have a Ouija board session once, my only one, and it was actually very positive. Although I would never, you know, I would kind of stay away from it because you don't know what's coming through or what's really happening. But it was the group of us were actually at the Lowe Hotel in downtown Point Pleasant, West Virginia, home of the Mothman a few years ago, and we were in the lobby there, and we were moving around with a planchette, people taking different turns. And the one lady that was with us said that it seemed like it was spelling out the initials of her grandmother. Her grandmother had passed several years before. So we all took turns. And the upshot of it was it was like a very pleasant, positive conversation for about an hour, ostensibly with her grandmother. And again, we were all switching nobody was faking it because we were all switching people on the planchette. But so that was actually, it was positive and uplifting. But I would caution people to just be very careful.
Sure,
so would I. I'd tell you about my experience. Okay, I cut the letters out. I put them around in a circle. I had a couple of friends in. Mum and Dad had gone out, and I put the glass in the middle, upside down. Right, there we were getting into it. The glass was moving and everything. Dad walked in. Don't you ever do that in my house? Clip round the ear, and that was it. Never again did I do it.
Oh, right. It was very popular when I was a kid.
I was the one that got walloped, not my sisters.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to be careful. I mean, you don't want to attract like poltergeist or something.
It was popular in the 70s.
Very, very much so. Yeah, really popular. Yes, mate, I'm mentioning poltergeist and things. Of course, my practice area covers the Enfield poltergeist. And I've met a lot of people who either witnessed it or been involved with that. That's a very interesting case.
How long was this going on? For how long of a period?
I think about 1977, around about that time, for about a year, maybe 18 months.
Wow.
And it was a council house. A council house is, I suppose, called Project House. It's a rented house owned by the local council. And there was a family in a place called Green Street, which is literally a short walk from my surgery, about just across a park, about half a mile walk. That's all. And there were a couple of girls there. There was a boy as well, but I think he was in a special boarding school. So there were two girls and the mum, Peggy, and I can't remember the girl's name now, but one of the younger girl started channeling these voices. And then there was levitation phenomena, apports, things being thrown around.
A police officer saw the armchair move across the floor, didn't they?
Absolutely. A lollipop lady, that's a traffic school crossing guard. They carry a big sign that looks like a lollipop. So you call them lollipop ladies in the UK. So the lollipop lady there's a school opposite the house, and there's a zebra crossing, and she was doing duty there, and she could actually see the house, and she could see one of the girls levitating, and I looked after the family of I think the daughter-in-law of the lollipop lady, and she said her mother-in-law definitely saw this. I got another patient called Roy, and Roy ran a shop opposite my surgery, and he actually went into the house and saw the poltergeist. He was having a cup of tea, and he said, Peggy, the mum, put the cup of tea on the arm of the settee he was sitting on, and he said, and the cup of tea and the saucer it was on lifted up gently and sailed across the room and smashed into the wall, and he just beat it out of the house as fast as he could. He said, I'm never going back in that house again. When word got round that I was training as a medium, my wife, who's also a doctor, used to work at a practice in an area called Muswell Hill in London. And the doctor she worked with goes to my gym, and he came up to me in the gym and said, Ian, I hear that you're into psychic stuff. He said, do you know, I look after Maurice Grosse. Now, Maurice Grosse was one of the researchers. He was from the Society for Psychical Research. He actually researched with a guy called Guy Lyon Playfair, and the two of them researched this house and wrote a book on it. Guy Playfair wrote a book, This House is Haunted. So he said, would you like to meet Maurice as you work in that area and you're training as a medium? I said, yeah. So he put me in touch with this. I went round to Maurice's house, and Maurice actually played me the audio tapes of all the voices, and they were really creepy. And I spent about an hour and a half with Maurice just before he died, a year before he died. And when I left his house, he shook my hand and said, Ian, he said, I've been researching as poltergeists, what they call spontaneous phenomena, for 30 years, and I can absolutely tell you, I have no doubt that there is life after death. So he was absolutely convinced of it. I met Guy Playfair at a party somewhere in Chelsea after that, and he actually did the blurb for my book. So I've met everybody apart from the girls, and it turned out. So here's another synchronous story, if we've got time.
Sure.
Do you know they did a film about the Enfield poltergeist, and it took about 2 years. There were rumours of it going, and we were in my staff room at work. One of the secretaries who didn't know about the Enfield poltergeist, she was reading it in the local paper. She said, "What's this about the Enfield poltergeist?" So I told her the story, and I said, "Yeah, it was really good." So then I had to do a home visit, and the home visit. We have a book of home visits, house calls, and I decided to take a house call, just pick one at random, because it was near a shop. Now, this shop is where they make T-shirts, printed T-shirts. The reason why I took this visit was because I'd actually joined a ghost hunting club run by one of my patients. And when you go on a ghost hunt, you have to wear a T-shirt with the logo on it. And what they do is they phone the local police and say, look, there's a bunch of us hanging around this area at night. We'll be wearing these T-shirts with this logo. That's what we're doing. So if you see anything suspicious, it's us. So that's why you wear a T-shirt with the Ghost Club logo on it. So I was going to collect my Ghost Club. So there's a reason for this. At a shop called Direct Boot and Shoe, where they have this amazing printing machine. It's like a loom. It's like a printer. It could print from a computer, and it embroiders the T-shirt whilst you wait. So I thought, okay, I'll take this home visit. This was a guy who had a back operation. He needed to be seen at home. I'll pick up my T-shirt first, then pop round and see Derek. Is the patient. It took about an hour for the T-shirt to print, so I was a bit late for my visit. So I said, "Oh, Derek, I'm sorry I was late. I was picking up my T-shirt from the shop next door." And he said, "Oh, well, what T-shirt was it, Doc?" I said, "Oh, I've joined a ghost hunting club, and we have to wear these T-shirts." And he said, "Oh, well, you should tell my dad about this because he's really interested in this." And his dad had come over from Spain to look after, his mum and dad had come over from Spain to look after Derek whilst he was recovering from his back operation. So I said, okay, I'll tell him. So I went downstairs and spoke to Terry, his dad, and said, "Oh, Terry, Derek told me you're interested in psychic phenomena and ghosts." He said, yeah, and he proudly said, "I am the son of the Enfield poltergeist." I said, "What?" I said, "We've just been talking about this." He said, "Yeah." He said, there was a program in the TV program.
So he was hold on a minute. He was the son of the actual poltergeist itself.
Yes.
Not the family that lived in the house.
No. So the spirit that came through claimed to be Bill and said that he died in that house.
Yeah.
Michael Aspel Do you remember Michael Aspel?
Yeah,
Strange But True?
television. Yeah,
In television, it used to be a newsreader. He had this television program in the 90s called Strange But True. And he did a really good, you can see it on YouTube, a really good, one of the best documentaries about the Enfield poltergeist, better than everything that's come afterwards, and played on his TV program the tapes that Maurice Grosse had recorded. And Terry had heard it and said, that sounds like my dad. And then he realized that actually he had grown up in that house and his dad had died in that house. And the spirit claimed to have gone blind and died in that house. And that's exactly what happened to Terry's dad. Yeah. So then Terry contacted Michael Aspel and said, look, you know, that I think that was my dad. And that's how, that's the provenance of the spirit. So I was actually looking after the grandson of the Enfield poltergeist. So Terry had to come down to the surgery and collect a sick note, because I said, okay, Terry, I'll leave you a sick note for your employer so you can take some time off work to recover from your operation. And when Terry came to pick up the sick note, I introduced him to the secretary who'd never heard of the Enfield poltergeist. Now, what do you think of that coincidence? I mean, that is incredible, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, you've been talking about the Enfield poltergeist, and at random, I'd picked to pick up a ghost hunting T-shirt. I met his son and grandson of the Enfield poltergeist. How the hell does that work? I mean, honestly.
That's bizarre. Have you ever, since you've, I mean, I guess if some people know now that you have some abilities, has anybody ever said, "Hey, I've got a haunted house. I need you to ghostbust it for me"?
Yes. I have. But I don't do that. I was into ghost hunting, but you know what? It's the most boring thing ever. I mean. You had these things on TV. We had Most Haunted, and things were popping off every 5 seconds. But actually, you know, you have to stay up late. Nothing happens. And actually, we did stake out. I tell you what, we did stake out the Salt Tower, which is in the Tower of London. So this guy Mark, who's my patient, he no other ghost hunters has ever managed to do a ghost hunt in the Tower of London. It's not allowed. But he had a contact who was friendly with the chief beefeater of the Tower of London. And beefeaters are actually ex-soldiers. This guy was an ex-soldier from Afghanistan. These are tough guys. You know, they've seen action. And then they get given the ceremonial position. And we actually got permission to do a ghost hunt in the Salt Tower, which is one of the towers at the Tower of London. That was pretty incredible.
Anything happen?
Well, to me, it did actually. Yes, it's funny. It was all internal to me, but I was I sat in the tower and opened up, went through the opening up thing, the opening up your psychic centers. And I felt all of a sudden that I was actually in the tower, but it was like a medieval scene. And I could see with my mind's eye, I could see that the square was full of people. It was like a fair, a lot of bustling going on. And I realized that I was actually one of the jailers, and I was tossing these knuckle bones, you know, which they used to do, and that I was guarding a Scottish prisoner, and it was a very, very peculiar experience. And there was like a
prisoner,
and there was like a chained bear, you know, a dancing bear, and I could see all that in my head. I was describing this, and it was I just felt a bit weird, and then afterwards I felt better, and then when we went round the Salt Tower afterwards. Apparently, they had one of the kings of Scotland had been interred in the Salt Tower. I didn't know anything about that. So whether it was just me fantasizing or not, I don't know. But that's something which I think I picked up. And the beefeater actually told us a story. He said the reason why he was interested in ghosts was that when he'd just come back from Afghanistan, he was actually from Northampton, and they had houses there, married quarters, but the married quarters weren't ready. So he was put up in the barracks. I mean, they call them barracks, which are old Tudor barracks, in temporary accommodation, whilst he was waiting for his married accommodation to be available. Actually on site. And he said one night he was in bed, and he said the bed levitated with him in it and started shaking him. And he said he was absolutely terrified. He said, I've been shot at by the Taliban. He said, but this was the most terrifying thing I'd ever experienced. There we go.
So do you feel...
That's a good story, isn't it?
Yes. Do you feel that I've done a little bit of ghost hunting with people that actually do it, but that's not really my area. But do you feel that there is a distinction between conscious or interactive hauntings, and is there something that we would consider residual or something that's more of an imprint?
That's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, people talk about it. I don't know, but I think, certainly in terms of mediumship, you do pick up energy. I mean, for instance, sometimes when the link's not strong, I will actually ask for an object from somebody. So like, give me your father's ring or give me that. And that often helps. So there must be, I guess we don't understand how the universe works, do we? We talk about energy as if it's something, but energy is like a physical term. The more I think about it, the more I think we live in an infoverse. So what we're talking about is receiving information. So I guess everything is really just information in some sort of, the more we think about it, the more we think of they used to say the universe is a mental construct. The only true thing is mind. The Victorians would say the universe is mental. Actually, it is mental, really. It's bloody mental, if you ask me. But mental in terms of it's being made out of mind stuff. Now we talk about the universe as being made out of like a virtual construct. And I've come to the conclusion that possibly, the idea that consciousness is actually primary and that everything stems from consciousness. So we have a dream, we have things in our minds. When you're in your dream, it feels real. When you're in a virtual reality simulation, it feels real. So is it energy, is information? I don't know. So maybe there is what we call residual is just a way of linking into the information from that person. And if it's information, is the person still there? In some other way.
I just always wondered, and I don't really have the answer. We have. Are you familiar with what they call the Philip experiment?
Yeah, absolutely. In Toronto.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And most people are there listening where they created somebody out of history and it became interactive. Yeah. And we have the claim or the belief in the tulpa, a thought form, the Tibetans, and. And also we have the lore of the Slender Man that was supposedly started out as a internet hoax. I just always wondered if perhaps in some cases, and I don't know what would create a residual haunting. There must be some kind of a circumstance to make that imprint because apparently not everybody leaves it behind. But I just always wondered if an imprint could at some point become itself interactive. Like the Philip experiment, even though that person's soul or essence that has actually moved on somewhere. Yeah,
because there's a famous, I can't remember who it is, a woman who she created this monk, didn't she? The tulpa of a monk, and he was
Alexandria David Neal.
That's right, and then eventually the monk became evil looking and took a life of his own.
Yes,
punish him. Now that's of course. Remember Forbidden Planet, the film Forbidden Planet.
Oh, perfect example.
Absolutely. Yes. Because the big question is what are we? The whole point is who created us? Are we tulpas of something higher? And if we've got creative ability, and so you think, well, is this part of us? But then are we a part of something else? And if we're part of something else, are we real? At the end of it, maybe.
It's all equivalent. Doc, you're getting too heavy now.
Well, it's, as they say, it's turtles all the way down. We're at this end. It's quite circular.
Let's just tell people what you refer to Forbidden Planet. Let's tell people what that refers to, so that in case they haven't seen the film.
Absolutely. Well, it's a 1956. Was it 1956 film?
About that, yeah. It's a great, very well produced science fiction film.
Yes, and it was based. It had the very first electronic music, and it had. Oh God, what was his name? What was the name of the actor?
Leslie Nielsen.
Yes, that's it. And
Richard Carlson.
A flying saucer from Earth, and it's basically based on The Tempest. So they go to this planet where there's this doctor who's got a daughter, beautiful daughter.
Morbius,
Dr. Morbius, and he's come across this ancient technology from these beings that
the Krell, I think.
The Krell, that's it. And they've got these vast computers. The interesting thing is, of course, is that this vast electronic computer uses relays, clicking mechanical relays, which now, because we have in tiny chips that don't click, fit into your phone. But because this is a giant 1956 computer with relays and those weird-looking lights and looks like a power station and lightning bolts, and it can boost your brain. And it gets a brain boost, but unfortunately, it boosts his lower elements of his personality as well. And the one thing he doesn't want to do is to let his daughter grow up and go off with these people. So this monster starts attacking them, and it's a weird invisible monster. And there's this fantastic scene where the monster interacts with this force field, and I mean it's really good. It was frightened the bejesus out of me as a kid. You saw this monster, this car. Actually, it was actually a cartoon.
They used Disney animation to represent that translucent creature.
Yeah, in the end, of course, Morbius has to disown the monster, and the daughter goes off with the captain, and the planet blows up. But it was really good, and of course, they based Star Trek on that film, I think, didn't they?
I think so. Much of it, and it was Walter Pidgeon that played Dr. Morbius. Yes, and it was the theme was they finally figured out they couldn't figure out why they were all extinct. I mean, they left this great vast technology behind, but it was monsters from the id. Yeah, that is the Freudian ID. Yeah, and what a concept so far ahead of its time.
Yes, I mean, fantastic. I mean, actually, I suppose really when you see that as a kid, it obviously sinks in. I think that quite influenced me, the idea of these unconscious forces. Of course, the other great, I mean, there were two really good science fiction, actually three. This Island Earth, which is another one at the time. And, of course, the other one was The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right.
Which is what's happened to us, really.
Yes.
The first
there's another one that deals with the mind, and that was Quatermass and the Pit.
Quatermass, yes.
Yes.
Yes, that my father used to call him Quartermass. He never got the hang of.
It took me a while to figure it out too, but that was one where they discovered this thing in the London subway. They're actually extending it, and it turns out it's from the Martians. Back when the Martians kept us, we were slaves, and they were cruel masters. And they found the elongated skulls now where they were experimenting on us experimenting on I guess monkeys and apes, sort of like a modern day or what now we would look at on ancient aliens or whatever. Yeah. But that was almost like John Keel. You and I had a brief discussion about Mr. Keel, who the author of the Mothman Prophecies, and I think speaking of Keel, I wanted to ask you one thing based on his research. I just wonder if sometimes people that have certain experiences like you do have had a whole array of different experiences. In other words, have you ever seen anything like a UFO?
Yes, I have.
Or dare I say a cryptid sighting or whatever, but go ahead.
I've certainly seen a UFO. I've had quite a lot. I mean, because when my friends hear you hear this, they say, well, of course, Ian would, wouldn't he? But I suppose being a doctor does give me a little bit more credibility, but not much. But no, actually, I did when I was 14. So, of course, I was obsessed with space. Well, we all were. If you were a boy.
Oh, sure.
I mean, they were landing on the moon. I mean, I was into astronomy. My friend Nick and I, we were making our own telescopes, or Nick was. We were planning on it. I used to do sky watching every night. Not that it was much in a London sky, but this Victorian house I grew up in, it was in two sections. A main section at the front, 3 stories, and the back was 2 stories. So you could open up a window and sort of sit on the windowsill and put your feet on the roof, the low roof. It had a fantastic view of the sky looking north. And one evening it was a very low cloud. I don't know how high it was. I'm useless at heights, but so you couldn't see the stars. But I looked up and I could see what looked like the full moon, but it was about a quarter of the size of the full moon. Below the cloud cover, I can't say how high it was. It was just hanging there. I remember looking at it through binoculars and couldn't see it. I couldn't see any features on it. I got my mum up and showed her, and she looked at it. She said, well, that's odd. Didn't know what it was. And after all, it got a bit boring. So I sort of just went to bed. And then I woke up at about 2:00 in the morning. I didn't know why I woke up, but I just thought, is that thing still there? So I opened the window and it was still there. But by that time, the clouds had cleared and you could see the skies. Actually, it was quite a stiff breeze. You could see the clouds scudding across the sky. And you could see the stars. And this thing was still hung there, just sort of north, slightly west, almost right above me. And then as I looked at it, the thing started to drift. drift eastward. And as it drifted, it moved faster and faster until it moved across the east. There was a railway line just to the east of me, and it moved really. By the time it crossed half the sky, it was moving really fast. It just then shot across the railway line and dwindled to a little speck. You know, like in Star Trek when it goes, the old Star Trek, when it goes whoosh, you see a little dot, just like that. And I don't know what it was. I still don't know what it was. But the funny thing was that, first of all, why did I wake up at the precise instant that it moved? I certainly wasn't dreaming. Why did I wake up at the precise instant? And then some stuff happened to me afterwards. So up to that point, I'd been quite not that great at school. I'm an August baby, so I was the youngest in my class. I was struggling a bit, and from that point onwards, I sort of just seemed to get a bit cleverer. Now, I used to joke that I think this UFO tinkered with me, and I was just joking. But actually, I don't know. Maybe it did. I don't know. But I did feel that it was in some way calling to me, and then somehow it woke me up, and I was meant to see that. But I mean, no implants, no scoop marks, no grey aliens.
No missing time, as far as you know.
No, not as far as I know. But I mean, because I'm very interested in that. I always have been. I've been more interested in UFOs than mediumship for most of my life. I mean, I was 6 when there was the first UFO flap in the UK that I remember. I've been absolutely intrigued by UFOs since then. And of course, with all
which one was that, Ian?
Oh God, 1966. I think it was probably the Warminster one, wasn't it? Around about that time, I was born in 55. The Warminster thing.
A big year for all over the world for UFO events. 66.
Yeah, well, no, so I was 6. I wanted to that'd be 61. That wouldn't be the Warminster one. I don't know. I remember seeing a picture of it. It used to be on a TV program called Here and Now, and I remember seeing the UFO and going to bed like really frightened that the Martians were going to come. But of course, when I was a teenager, Warminster in Wiltshire was the hot spot. We're talking about the early 70s, 1971, and we used to go down there and go UFO hunting. But there were a load of hippies there, and it was great. Never saw anything, but I certainly met a lot of very strange people taking some very strange substances.
Well, I'm a huge fan of the Warminster mystery, and it was Arthur Shuttlewood wrote several books on Warminster, and that's always been a fascinating area. And even there's another series of books by some guys that were kids that several years later they would go there every year and go to, I think it was it Cradle Hill and maybe one of the other hills. Yes,
I used to go there,
watch these strange lights. Oh, I envy you. Yeah. I would have loved to have gone
back in the day. Back in the day, it was great because it wasn't so much because I didn't see anything there, but because all the hippies were there, and it was it's like a real festival atmosphere. It was great. We used to drive down there in my friend's car, bunch of teenagers, and say, let's go UFO hunting. It was those were definitely the days. But of course now with all the latest UFO revelations, or UAP we have to call it now, don't we?
Right. Unidentified aerial phenomena, I guess.
Yeah. So we have to, if they release it, they mustn't possibly tell us that they've been lying to us all these years. So just change the name. So what do you feel about this, Steve and Irene? What's your take?
What, the disclosure?
Yeah.
You know what? I guess I'm still kind of a cynic when it comes to that. It seems like more and more comes out, but they still kind of sit on their hands about it, at least officialdom. And I think they would be content just to let us. There's so many things that are obvious that something is real and tangible going on, and a lot of documents do get released. But it's kind of like, if we keep quiet about it, the masses will just kind of keep wondering, and they won't get too uppity. But I don't think you know how they had the Brookings report or whatever they claimed that everybody was going to go nuts and crazy if this was revealed. I think that's nonsense. I think we can handle it. I think some groups would just say it's not real anyway, and some people would think it's satanic, and other people would say it's a government conspiracy, and everybody would just kind of process it in their own way. And I don't think we'd be going screaming in the streets, jumping out windows.
I don't know. I would.
Not now.
Except for Irene.
But not now. I get. The way I see it. I'm absolutely convinced it's a real phenomenon.
Yes.
the way I would see it is that there's been a gradual acclimatization throughout, my lifetime. That if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it gradually and get people used to it. So almost to the point where people would just accept it. I said, well, of course this happens. I mean, everybody now, I mean, there's a lot of people who say, well, of course there's aliens. Of course they've been visiting us. Why not? I mean, I can imagine in a few years' time, they won't even have to land on the White House. Some people will just say, well, yeah, we've always known this. Why is, so
There's so many images of strange things on the moon and Mars, and I don't think all of them are CGI or hoaxes, No, but again, they found things that look like trees on Mars, and those strange, I don't know what they even call them, like tunnel-like, translucent tunnels and so forth. I mean, on and on, but they just don't NASA just doesn't, react to it and say, yep, here's the pictures, and, we're just not going to comment on them.
Well, if Elon Musk gets there, they're going to have to say something. That's for sure. Which is my other favorite thing I'm watching at the moment. But every time I look at another Elon Musk launch, I love all that stuff. I think, but remember what Brad Sorensen saw. Do you know the story about Brad Sorensen in the 1980s? Mark McCandlish and all that stuff. You heard that story?
No, I don't.
So Mark McCandlish is he's an aviation artist. So he's although he's a graphic designer and artist, so he knows he's not a technician, but he knows a lot about aircraft. That was his job. So he would, if Boeing had a new aircraft, he would actually illustrate it, and he was very good with technical drawings. So in the 1980s, I think it was, he got phoned up by a friend called Brad Sorensen. He's in the States, and said, "There's this air show. Do you want to come to? I've got some tickets." A friend, he was with a senator who'd been invited. He had a couple of tickets. He said, "Do you want to come?" And he couldn't do it because he had he was a magazine article he was finishing off. So Brad Sorensen went off with his senator, and they ended up at some sort of Air Force base. And then they got into a plane, and the senator said, "You're not meant to really be with me, but if they say anything, just say that it's okay. I'm with you. That's okay." So they went to a different Air Force base, not sure which one. I don't think he was sure which one, maybe Wright-Patterson, something like that. And they go into this hangar, and the hangar is huge, and there's lots of people there, quite important people, and he's in the party, and he's feeling a bit out of place. But he saw in this hangar was filled with odd-looking planes, conventional aircraft, which looked like they'd been prototypes that had been developed by the Air Force, but never really used, which was quite interesting. But half of the hangar was curtained off. He then claimed that there was, they said, okay, now the presentation's starting, and that the curtains were drawn back, and he was confronted with 3 flying saucers. Wow. And there were 3, so he called them Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. So there was a big one, medium-sized one, little one, and they were just floating there, there.
Just
hovering.
And
they looked hovering. They looked silently. They looked like they'd been around a bit. They looked a bit knocked about, a bit tatty, and they looked like they'd been built by us. They had like a door, which is like a submarine door, and they looked like they were coated in lead, white lead paint. So it's like slightly textured paint. So it didn't look like your classic, your classic flying saucer shape, but you wouldn't expect to have a submarine door on it. You wouldn't expect it to have be coated in sort of look like the stuff you put on ceilings that are
right.
Textured paint. And there was a 3-star general on a podium talking about it, and there was a video cassette playing with a monitor showing this thing making these jerky movements. Well, by that time he was really quite frightened because he realised he shouldn't have seen it. So he got back and then phoned Mark McCandlish, and there was a cutaway section of one of them, and he noted it. And this guy Brad Sorensen was a technical artist, so he looked at it and noted it. And he got back and phoned up Mark McCandlish and started telling him. And so he said, "Look, we shouldn't be talking about this on the phone." So he then met Mark McCandlish, and between them, they came up with the specs for this flying saucer based on what he'd seen. And this is, you can look it up. It's known as the Flux Liner.
Okay.
Because
it seemed like a credible report.
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And there's loads about Mark McCamish on YouTube, and it looks, as far as he's concerned, he says, look, this makes absolute sense. It seemed to be the controls were quite simple. He said it seemed to be some sort of electrostatic craft that seemed to repel gravity, and it looked like it had a robotic arm on it, and it looked like it had been seen service. So whenever I see the Elon Musk launches, I think, well, is there some other thing that's going on that's been around that they haven't told us? And of course, there's this guy called Nick Cook. Nick Cook, who wrote the book The Hunt for Zero Point. Have you heard of this?
I know. I've heard of it. Yes.
So Nick Cook's he wrote for Jane's Defense Weekly. He was an air expert, and he was very interested in artificial gravity, anti-gravity. He'd been doing some research, and he'd realised that in the early to mid 50s, there's a lot of talk about breakthroughs being made in anti-gravity, and there was loads of articles in the journals at that time, and then there was nothing. It just like it never existed, and he actually thought that indicated that there had been a breakthrough and it had gone black. So he did a lot of research for that, and he came up with a book. He wrote the book The Hunt for Zero Point, and actually had a TV documentary. And he looked up he'd done a lot of work on it. At one time he thought there was this German device called Die Glocke, which he thought might have been an anti-gravity device. He doesn't think that anymore. He thinks actually it was more to do with a nuclear reactor that they were researching. But he actually thinks that elements of anti-gravity have been used in some conventional planes that's just not talked about. So there's always these undercurrents going on. So I'm sure we don't know the half of it, to be honest.
Well, yes, I think that they love keeping the great unwashed, us, in the dark. But I wanted to go back to one other thing. You mentioned UFOs and mediumship. That's another whole fascinating area, because if you go back to George Van Tassel, remember Giant Rock in California back in the 50s? He used to channel the Space Brothers, and he used to have these great. I wish I had been old enough to go to the Giant Rock conventions where they had all the so-called contactees there. That must have been a great time. But it's interesting that when you look at some of the channelers and when talking about the Space Brothers in different generations, different places, a lot of times the same messages come through, same general concepts. I mean, some of them certainly I think are silly, but a lot of the same concepts. And sometimes you'll hear them say that, well, we can't land right now or whatever, but if you step outside and look toward the west, you'll see our craft. And sure enough, they will step outside and they would see some kind of a strange light or craft. But there are different things like some of the messages that would come through, like the bad aliens came from the Orion group. The good ones come from the Pleiades. Another theme is that there was a planet that became the asteroid belt called Meldek, and on and on. It's just very interesting that people that way before the internet, and again generationally and so forth, people that didn't interact, a lot of times the same messages come through, and that's always been fascinating to me.
And to me, and there's certain things that come through. I mean, where do you begin? Of course, there's a couple of things. First, let's talk about mediumship and UFOs. I actually know a guy. Have you heard of the skull experiment? The physical.
Yes.
Yeah,
I
know.
We had him on as a guest.
So Robin, you had Robin Foy as a guest.
Okay, fascinating book.
Did Robin tell you? He must have mentioned about the time the mini UFO appeared then. Mini flying
I can't remember. It was so long ago.
Well, I know a guy.
But the recording is still here. It's still on the network.
So there's a friend of mine who actually sat in with him, and his wife sat in with Robin Foy, and a little UFO, a little flying saucer appeared, and fixed people with a searchlight as it moved round. And that was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. So again, there's a link between physical mediumship and UFOs. But to Steve, just to explore the theme, one of the themes, of course, in modern in contactees has been the ecological idea. So the woman in her kitchen in 1950s England, this alien suddenly appears in her kitchen. He spreads his arms out, and between his arms, this TV screen appears showing images of world destruction. what the hell was that? Well, now we think if it's a hologram. The Ariel School, the Ariel School in South Africa. The children, investigated by John Mack. Children see this flying saucer land. A being in a black suit comes out with dark eyes, looks at some of the girls, and they've been on TV recently, talking about this, and they have images of ecological catastrophe being beamed into them. There's this eco thing going along all the time, and it just occurred to me, well, not just now, but I've been thinking, let's take a Jacques Vallée view of this, and let's broaden it. Supposing you're Gaia, you are the Earth, and you're trying to communicate to these humans who are running amok and destroying everything. How would you do it? How would you communicate to something which, how would we communicate to ants? I just wonder if maybe this is Gaia producing this because we're into technology, so it produces a technological tulpa, which then gives us these images, trying to steer us in the right direction. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can play this.
Well, yes, and that's and Jacques Vallée is the other guy was John Keel with his book Operation Trojan Horse, which completely turned everything upside down for me. He's the one that demonstrated that there seem to be connections between all these different things that we don't think have connections, like cryptids, UFOs, poltergeist phenomena, etc. But of course, the book that electrified me when I was a kid was his Passport to Magonia, where he demonstrates various traditions of folklore, and then talks about some modern day UFO experiences and shows how they're very similar.
Yes. Yeah, well, exactly. So what are we dealing with? We're dealing with something, it's intangible. I mean, and maybe it's because what we're looking at is impossible to grasp. It's like the three blind men with the elephant.
Yes.
One feels the trunk, one thinks it's a snake, one feels the leg, thinks the tree. Maybe we see something and we have to interpret in ways that we can understand, and we can't put it all together because we can't see the whole elephant for what it really is. Maybe it's that.
Yet there are, even though there are those problems, generally speaking, there are these patterns and these parallels that all people that don't know each other haven't experienced the phenomena before. They're there, and that demonstrates there is something real to it, something consistent, even though it's ethereal, it's elusive sometimes, and it's very hard to wrap our minds around it.
And it plays tricks on you. I mean, there's a guy who wrote a book called the Paranormal and the Trickster and the Paranormal. I can't remember his name.
George? There's a couple of them. George somebody.
Hanley, maybe, I don't know. Anyway,
Hansen, George Hansen.
George Hansen, and he, of course, so he says that whenever you get into this area, it will always wrong foot you because it's liminal, and whatever it is, it has to defy classification, I guess. So just when you think you've got it, it turns on you, and you don't understand it anymore. And that's a very important thing because anybody.
Ian, it's like when you gave the example of Alexandria David Neal creating the tulpa of the Jolly Little Llama and how it went through those stages where it changed.
Yeah. So there you go. So but of course, as a human, you have to have some sort of framework in which to work with, and so naturally, I mean, my framework is spiritualism, I suppose. Really, when it comes to mediumship, it's about whether it's obviously just one aspect of the whole shebang.
Yes, but with you've come to the point where you're not fixed or rigid in your viewpoint, and you can kind of adjust it because because of what we're dealing with is so elusive and hard to objectify, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And that's actually like practicing medicine, the primary care physician, because if you're a hospital doctor, it's all cut and dried. By the time the patient gets into the hospital, they're seriously ill. You can do your tests. You can more or less work out what's going on. But when they come to the GP or the primary care physician, they may or may not have a physical illness. It might be something this, it might be that. And just when you think you've got something else, it turns into something else. So it's all part of my professional life. You can never pin anything down. which is a shame, really, because I'm quite obsessive. I do like to pin things down. And I get quite upset if I can't do it. So there we go.
I used to be the kind of guy I was very happy back in the 60s with little silver-suited aliens jumping out of egg-shaped craft, collecting soil samples, and that was it. And then I started reading John Keel, and I thought, okay, there's an aspect there, but then there's so much else below the surface that you really have to kind of expand your mind.
Can I mention Rubenstein's first law of the paranormal?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and it goes like this. It always ends with aliens. So that is it. It's always so. When I wrote my book, I spoke to this doctor. I thought I was going to be a healer, and I spoke to a doctor who was a healer, and he was a very strange guy. He was whispering on the phone to me, and he said, I live in my apartment. I've got a little alien who lives with me. He's very shy, but I know he's there. I thought he was bonkers, and I thought to myself, is this how I'm going to end up? Living in an apartment, thinking I've got an alien, and I thought, hopefully not. But actually, my first law is it always ends with aliens, because whichever door you go through, be it Bigfoot, ghosts, mediumship, cryptids, whatever, you always end up with aliens. They're like the sink. You're gonna have to do with the little buggers anyway. So that's it. So that's my first law. Don't know what my second law of the paranormal is, but there we go. Maybe that'll get. Maybe someone will put that into Wikipedia, but so far no luck.
Well, I tell you, Ian, this has been a mind-blowing show. Absolutely mind-blowing. But listening to you two going on, I was lost. I was lost in half of it.
I hope the audience of the listeners have carried.
I think so.
Along with us.
I think so. We even though we might have gone off the beam a bit, we did explain where we were going off the beam. So, but Doctor, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today.
I've had the time of my life. To be honest, what it's like with lockdown. I mean, you don't get to meet many new people, so it's always great to have a chat, and especially about these things. It does lift you up a bit, doesn't it? I do feel like that what's happened is that Mother Nature has sent us a warning shot across the bows.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think the next big thing we have to deal with is global warming, and because I think one thing we've learned is when things happen, they happen bloody quick. We're not used to exponential growth. Just before we go, my son's a mathematician, and he was doing a PhD. He was in Germany at the time, about a year ago, and he was phoning me up saying, "Dad, you've got to take this seriously." I was thinking, "Oh, you're just anxious. You're doing your PhD." He said, "Look, I've been following this. I've been modelling it. When it happens, it's going to happen really quickly. It's exponential. So it happens really, really quickly." And I remember thinking, "Yeah, it's in China." Well,
he was right.
He was absolutely right. 1 minute there was nothing, and the next minute,
1 minute it was normal life. The next minute we're locked up.
And the good thing is, of course, is exponential growth. You get exponential decay as well. If you stop it, it will go down just as quickly. But I mean, but now play that out with global warming. We know that the ice caps, there's meltwater under the ice caps.
Yeah.
This tipping point is exponential, and we could flip over into a strange new world. And whatever these beings are, they've been warning about it, for the best part of 70 years. So I think maybe we need to pay attention to it. I mean, after all, what has this done? There's no travel. Do you remember the first lockdown? The air was pure. You could see the birds. Maybe this is something which we're going to have to see the deeper spiritual significance of COVID. God help us, eh?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
very true. Anyway, your book.
Yes, tell us. Make sure and tell us about how to contact information and books and so forth.
Oh yeah, well I got one book. I should write another one, but things have intervened like pandemics and stuff. But it's called Consulting Spirit. Doctor's Experience with Practical Mediumship. It's published by Anomalist Books. It's not self-published. I have a proper editor who's gone through it all, so there shouldn't be too many spelling mistakes in it and things like that. Anomalist Books are great. They do lots and lots of interesting books. I recommend you go to their website. You can get my book on Amazon's Kindle or
I went to Amazon today. It said it's out of stock.
No, if you order it, it's print on demand.
Oh,
so when you do they don't have stock. So yeah, it often says that, but it's still available. And there's the Kindle version. And it's a story of my all the wacky, wild adventures that got me from being a standard doctor to being this crazy person you can hear at the moment. I tell you what,
this crazy person that just natters on about aliens all the time.
Absolutely, but it revitalized my professional life. You know, it really completely got my medicine onto a different level.
And what really came through was the satisfaction you feel when you're able to help people, sometimes in a very unconventional manner.
Oh, it's always the more unconventional, the better, as far as I'm concerned. And listen, it's great to be able to help people by prescribing drugs and stuff. It's even better to give a little bit of yourself to help people.
Definitely.
A little bit of your soul in.
So that book's called Consulting Spirit.
Yes.
Okay. Don't go away, anyone, at the moment. All right, we're just in the show now.
Okay.
And before we end, again, Doctor, I want to thank you so much. It's been so much fun. And Irene, thank you for having me on as co-host today.
Oh, it's been lovely.
It's been
absolutely
great.
Lovely. Yeah. I tell you what, it's lovely to actually have you on my show, Steve, and watch you go. You know? Literally watch you go. Sit back, relax, and
I was a little concerned that this might not be my area, but you know, the psychic part. But but Ian is so well versed in all the good weird stuff that I am. So it was just a blast.
Yeah, Steve, we had Ian on in 2016,
Steve,
and he was absolutely brilliant then.
Can I ask Steve, what year were you born in?
1952.
55. So we're about contemporaries, aren't we? 50. So I mean, we're this contemporary age. So we are of a similar culture. I mean, I'm sure we've read the same books, had very similar influences on us. So that explains a lot, doesn't it? Really.
It's too bad we didn't live closer because we could trade books in our library.
Absolutely. Yeah. Unfortunately, my library now exists virtually. It's all on Kindle. I can never find anything now.
Oh, I can't find the physical books. I have to reorder them sometimes, but that's another story.
Yeah.
All right, then. So this is it, folks. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our guest, Ian Rubenstein, and thank you to my guest co-host, Stephen Ward.
My pleasure.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.